The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty expanse of the ranch. The wind picked up, rustling the sparse grass that clung to the earth, and the distant sound of cattle could be heard from the pen. It was the kind of evening where everything seemed still, but the air was charged with anticipation. In the modest farmhouse on the edge of the ranch, a young woman stood in front of the mirror. Her name was Clara, and today was the first day of her new life. The white lace of her wedding dress gleamed against the rough-hewn wood of the house, a stark contrast to the rugged life she had married into. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the bow at the back of her dress, a deep breath escaping her lips as she tried to steady herself. It was strange. Married life had never seemed so real until this very moment. Clara had never been one for grand displays of emotion. She was a woman of simplicity, raised on the land, learning from an early age how to care for animals and tend to a home. But now, standing in her new husband's home, it felt like everything had changed. His name was Ben Miller, a quiet man who had spent most of his life working the ranch with his father. He wasn't one to speak much, but when he did, there was a depth in his voice that made Clara's heart skip. Today, as they had exchanged vows in front of a small gathering of neighbors and family, she had seen something in his eyes, a softness that hinted at a tenderness she hadn't expected. Ben wasn't like the other men she'd known. Where they were brash and full of boastful confidence, Ben was quiet, reserved. He didn't say much, and what he did say was often laced with an almost painful sincerity. She couldn't help but feel drawn to him, even if he had never quite spoken of the things that troubled him. His shyness, though, was something she had grown to understand. In his eyes, she saw a man who carried the weight of his past that had shaped him into the stoic, thoughtful rancher she had married. Clara's heart pounded as she turned away from the mirror, walking slowly towards the door of the bedroom. Ben would be waiting for her in the parlor just as he had promised. It was strange to think of him as hers now in the truest sense of the word. There was no ceremony, no declaration, just a quiet promise made in the stillness of the church, a bond that had only deepened as they walked away as husband and wife. Ben sat on the edge of the worn leather chair, his broad shoulders hunched as he gazed out the window. His hat rested on the table next to him, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the muscles of a man who had worked the land his whole life. His brow furrowed slightly, and his fingers tapped nervously against the armrest of the chair. He was waiting for Clara to join him, but his shyness had gotten the better of him. He had never known how to express the emotions that swirled inside him, especially with Clara, who seemed so much more at ease in the world than he ever had been. Clara stepped into the room, the sound of her soft footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Ben looked up and his eyes met hers, wide with something that could only be described as uncertainty. "Clara," he said softly, his voice rough but tender. I don't know what to say." Clara smiled gently, her heart softening at his nervousness. She had seen this side of him before, quiet, unsure, and deeply thoughtful. It was one of the reasons she had fallen for him in the first place. He wasn't like the men she had known. He didn't try to charm or impress. Ben was simply Ben, and that was enough. "You don't need to say anything," Clara replied, walking towards him. "We're married now, Ben, and that's all that matters." Ben's eyes flickered with emotion, and for a moment he seemed lost in thought. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling as he took hers in his, as though unsure of how to proceed. The touch of his skin against hers sent a wave of warmth through Clara, and she could feel the tension in his fingers. I want to be good to you, Clara," Ben said quietly. "I want to be the husband you deserve." Clara's heart swelled at his words, her chest tightening with the depth of his sincerity. She knelt beside him, gently cupping his face with her hands. His eyes were soft, filled with so many unspoken thoughts, and Clara could see the vulnerability that he tried so hard to hide. "You already are," she whispered, brushing her thumb across his cheek. For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of the world falling away. Ben looked at her, his gaze filled with an emotion that took Clara's breath away. In that quiet moment she understood that they were beginning something new, something beautiful, a life built on quiet love and unspoken promises. Ben leaned in slowly, his lips brushing against her forehead in a gesture that was gentle, yet full of yearning. Clara closed her eyes, savoring the warmth of his touch and the softness of the moment. She knew that their journey together would not be easy, that there would be obstacles, struggles, and moments of uncertainty. But with Ben, she felt that they could face anything. The sound of the wind outside grew louder, but inside the house, all that could be heard was the steady rhythm of their breathing. As Ben held her close, Clara knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together, quietly, but surely with love as their guide. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the sun rising slowly over the wide, empty plains that stretched beyond the ranch. The morning air was cool, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and freshly cut hay. Clara stood in the kitchen, her hands working the dough for breakfast, while Ben was outside tending to the horses. Despite the quiet, there was an undeniable shift in the air, a sense of new beginnings and quiet anticipation. Clara had spent the night beside Ben, feeling the warmth of his body close to hers. There had been no rush, no urgent gestures, only the soft murmur of their voices and the gentle touch of hands that spoke volumes. Without needing words, they had fallen asleep wrapped in each other's embrace. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt truly at home. The ranch was still unfamiliar to her. The sounds of it strange, but in Ben's presence, she felt an undeniable comfort. His touch had been tender, yet there was a part of him that seemed to be holding something back. It wasn't just the silence that lingered. Between them, it was the way he avoided looking her directly, in the eye at times, the way his fingers trembled when they brushed against hers. It was as if Ben was carrying something inside him that he couldn't express. Clara had sensed it the night before in the silence that had passed between them. His emotions, though deeply buried, were there, hidden under layers of stoic calm. She wasn't sure what it was, but she could feel it, a deep well of vulnerability, an ocean of things unsaid. As she finished preparing breakfast, Clara felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. She had to be the one to reach out. She had to be the one to break through the walls Ben had built around himself. She had always known that being with someone as reserved as Ben wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. She was ready to take on whatever it took to understand him completely. Ben walked into the kitchen, his boots making soft echoes on the wooden floor, as he took off his wide-brimmed hat and set it on the table. He smiled shyly at her, his usual quiet manner still present, but something about the way he looked at her seemed different. "Morning," he said, his voice low and slightly gruff. "You sleep well?" Clara smiled warmly at him, her heart fluttering at the sound of his voice. "I did, thank you," she replied, turning to face him. "And you?" Ben hesitated for a moment, as if the question had caught him off guard. He scratched the back of his neck, a nervous habit that Clara had come to recognize. "I slept. Better than I expected," he said quietly, his gaze briefly meeting hers before he looked away. Clara took a deep breath, gathering the courage she needed. She knew this moment was coming, knew it would be the defining moment of their new life together. "Ben," she began softly, "is there something you're holding back? Something you're not telling me?" Ben's eyes widened slightly and he seemed to stiffen at the question. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. For a long moment he simply stood there, staring at her with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Then slowly, as though unsure of himself, he spoke. "I don't know how to do this, Clara," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be the husband you deserve. I don't know how to make you feel the way you should feel." Clara's heart ached at his words. She crossed the room slowly, stepping close to him, until there was barely any space between them. She gently cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing over his rough skin. "Ben," she said softly, her voice full of warmth and reassurance, "you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be anyone other than who you are. I love you for the man you are, not the one you think I want you to be." Ben closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath as her words settled into him. "But I don't know how to show you," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "I've never been good at it, at love, I mean. I don't know what I'm doing." Clara smiled gently, her fingers trailing along his jawline. "You're doing just fine," she reassured him. "Love isn't a set of rules, Ben. It's something that grows, something that takes time. And we have all the time in the world." Ben swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling with the weight of the emotions he had kept locked away for so long. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, to showing his heart so openly. But Clara's presence was like a soft breeze, coaxing him to open up, to trust her. He took a deep breath and, for the first time, looked directly into her eyes. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. Scared that I'll fail you. Scared that I won't be enough. Clara's heart swelled with tenderness. She gently brushed a lock of hair away from his forehead and leaned forward, her lips brushing against his in a slow, soft kiss. It was a kiss full of reassurance, full of promise, a kiss that said everything without needing words. When they pulled apart, Ben's eyes were soft, filled with gratitude and something else, a quiet understanding that had not been there before. "You're more than enough, Ben," Clara whispered, her forehead resting gently against his. "And I'm not going anywhere." Ben held her close then, his arms wrapping around her in a way that felt like both protection and surrender. For the first time since they had met, Clara felt like she was seeing the real Ben, the man who had struggled with his own fears and doubts, the man who had quietly loved her all along. As they stood there in the kitchen, wrapped in each other's embrace, Clara knew that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. There would be moments of fear and uncertainty, but together, they would face it all. And when they did, they would find that love, in its truest form, was not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up for each other. Every day, no matter what. With a soft smile, Clara pulled away just slightly, looking up at Ben. "We've got a lot to learn," she said quietly. Ben smiled back, his eyes filled with a warmth that made Clara's heart skip. "Together," he agreed.